Higher yields require high-performance crop nutrition. Through fusion technology, MicroEssentials is designed to increase nutrient uptake throughout the growing cycle. The unique chemical composition of MicroEssentials creates an acid zone around each granule. Lowering the pH promotes the formation of dihydrogen orthophosphate, a more readily available form of phosphate, resulting in increased nutrient uptake. With MicroEssentials SZ, plants more efficiently take up zinc because each nutritionally balanced granule delivers zinc evenly across the field. MicroEssentials also contains small elemental sulfur particles designed for faster oxidation to sulfate and increased uptake. The proof is in the performance. Research shows that plants take up nutrients more efficiently with MicroEssentials compared to traditional fertilizer blends, resulting in higher yields and higher profitability.
All right, well, thanks, Tyler, for the markets. Good morning and welcome to our new location here for the Red River Farm Network at Big Iron. My name is Randy Conan. I'd like to introduce the rest of our team. We've got Jay Rader over here on the sales side. You just heard Don Wick a little bit ago, and then Melissa Hammer and Tyler Donaldson. That's our humongous big team that we have. We're small but mighty. They do a good job. I can't think of a better way to kick off the 2025 Big Iron series here, seminars and outlooks with a weather outlook, with another, basically an RFN staff member, Drew Lerner, from World Weather Incorporated. We hired Drew to do our meteorology for us, and if you're like me, I've got multiple phone apps with multiple different weather apps on them. And I'm kind of a weather geek, I guess. It's the first thing I look at in the morning, and it's the first thing I look at when before I go to bed, and before we usually all the market casts, and see where the rain's at and what it's doing. And this year it's been rainy. It's been different this year. What's going on?
Yeah, it's been a good year. It seems like it's been forever coming. But we have had a pattern here that's been well mixed. And a lot of people have been suffering from a lot of heat and some dryness, but we've managed to get some timely rains across the valley here and really across the north central part of the U.S. in general. Canada, not so lucky, right? So we've been really fortunate to be where we are, and I think that we're going to continue to be maybe in a nice mode here for a little while longer. But there's really no good excuse why the weather is good. We're just the luck of the draw.
You're not going to take credit for it?
I'm not going to take credit for it, because if I do that, I have to take credit for everything I do, and I can't do that.
Yeah.
It's all made up. So
we started this spring. We thought we were going to have such an early spring after an open winter, and then it started raining.
Yes.
And it seemed like we'd get 2 or 3 dry days, and then it would rain some more. Especially that southern tier counties across southern Minnesota, northern Iowa. That area seemed like it was in the bullseye this year.
Yeah, it was. They had way too much rain in that area, and it really smothered out a lot of fields, and really kind of had a lot of people worried about where we were going to go down the road. And I think we managed to get out of it fairly well, and they did recover to some degree down that way, but it was a mess down there. You know, the atmosphere has been just a little out of sorts last few years. I mean, everybody can agree with that. But this year we kind of shoved around the big bad pockets a little bit and gave everybody a break. You know, a fairly large part of Canada's big bad drought, along with the northern plains, was eased this past spring, and we really, if it wasn't for that, we would have a big mess on our hands. Of course, market prices might be a lot better than they are if that hadn't happened, but absolutely, we did get into a wet mode there for a little while, and it did look a little bit questionable, but you know, from the eastern part of North Dakota and northern Minnesota northward, it was pretty darn good. You know, we had our moments, we always have our moments, but it wasn't a bad scenario.
One of the questions that I have is everybody was calling for this rapid changeover from La Nina to El Nino. Am I right there? Or is it the other way around?
Yeah, the other way around.
Other way around, okay. Seemed like that did not happen.
No. No.
And they're still calling for a quick switch whenever it switches.
Yeah.
So what gives?
Yeah, you know, what gives is that we don't know what we think we know, right? It's really kind of exciting. I know I've been doing this for 45 years, and we're still learning. And it's really fun in that sense. You know, sometimes you get in a job and you do the same thing all the time, and it gets boring after a while. But that wasn't the case. We think we know so much, seriously, and I think we forget that we're not in control of the weather, right? There are certain patterns that we can grab a hold of, and with some degree of confidence, we can do a fair job of forecasting. But there's two things that occurred this year that were like that. First was the La Nina event. NOAA's forecast model has been predicting La Nina since January, right? It's coming 6 weeks, you know, it's coming 6 more weeks, right? So it's not coming, folks, it's not coming. We'll have La Nina-like conditions, maybe, but we're not going to have a full-blown La Nina. And that's important to note. But, you know, our forecasts are only as good as the guy who created the computer program, right? And so we only know so much information, and so when we feed that information into a computer, the computer is going to fail if we failed, right? And we don't know everything, despite what some of the guys get up there on TV and they're beating their chests and saying, you know, this is what's going to happen. The truth of the matter is we have a lot of learning to do. The other thing that happened this year that was way off was the hurricane season, right? Supposed to have like 20 or 30 hurricanes, and we've had, what, 3? You know?
With a tropical storm hitting, or should be hurricane here by this afternoon
That's
or
right.
tomorrow.
That's right. Unfortunately for me, that we have hurricane in Louisiana. We're ground zero for that storm. But yeah, you know, we only know so much. We know to look for, you know, certain parameters in order to get things to happen. But when it comes to La Nina and El Nino, we don't know what changes the ocean temperatures. We can monitor the ocean temperatures and we can see they are changing, but predicting how much they're going to change and when it stops changing is very difficult to do. And so we haven't figured that out yet. So we'll not necessarily get those predictions right. And the same thing happened with the hurricanes. You know, we think that the only thing that drives hurricanes is, you know, warm water. Well, that's not true. It has a lot to do with how much wind shear there is aloft, how much dust is in the air, you know, a number of other factors of what's happening around. So, you know, we can only do what we can do so much.
I didn't realize, too, how much the Saharan dust, how far that moves across the ocean. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think, you know, 30 years ago, we didn't know that. You know, it's all from satellite imagery that's evolved over the years that we've figured that out. I'm not totally convinced that it's all about the dust, but it's all factored in, right? And until we get to the point where we can really sit down and put all that together and know what we're doing, we're going to continue to have guesswork, which is good job security, right? Maybe I can put another 5 or 10 years in or something.
So step us through, how do you go about then putting a forecast together with all those uncertainties?
Oh, it's a nightmare, Randy, it's a nightmare. You know, it's just real simple. I mean, everyone looks at a weather guy and says, oh, you know, I don't know what you guys think, actually. But for me to do the long-range forecasts, it is a very long process. I collect daily data going back in history. You've probably heard me talk a little bit about in the past about the 18-year cycle. It has to do with the upper air atmosphere. So I'll go back and I'll collect daily temperature and rainfall data going back at those 18-year intervals, collecting it all, putting it into loops, and running those and trying to figure out what the dominating pattern is. But then on top of that, you've got the El Nino, La Nina thing. You've got the Pacific decadal oscillation having to do with ocean temperatures in the Pacific and Arctic oscillation. You got all these things. And so it is very, very complex to try to figure it out. And the reason why we get it wrong all the time is because we think we know which is the most dominating weather feature or weather element, and we'll focus on that. Like maybe we'll focus on La Nina. Everyone thought that La Nina was coming. So that becomes our primary focal point, and if we got it wrong, we get it wrong, right? And we just can't do anything about that. So getting all those parameters together and trying to weigh them out is the only way you can get a forecast to verify. And really, to be honest with you, and I don't mean to put down younger meteorologists, but if you haven't worked for a long period of time and failed a lot of times along the way, there's no way you're going to learn, how to try to balance them out. And don't get me wrong, I am not the answer to weather. I have my problems pretty seriously too. But it's very difficult for a young person in this business to come along and try to do long-range forecasting.
Has social media changed how you do your job?
Social media can help my job a lot because it gives me verification that I don't have. We do, at World Weather, we are literally an international company, and we forecast the weather for every major agricultural area in the world. And so when we put out a forecast that you're talking about frost or freeze, in Argentina or a flood in Europe, sometimes it's difficult to get information back out that we were right. And if you don't have confirmation of what you predicted, then you don't learn whether you messed it up or not. So social media is very helpful in providing extra data. And the data networks are so more intense now than they were 20 or 30 years ago, and that is a huge plus. They can hurt, though, because sometimes social media gets hung up on oh my gosh, we're all going to die type thing.
Yep.
And it really hurts the business because the reality is the weather's always been outrageous. It's always been extreme. But now that we have, a reporter in every household holding a phone, and everybody can report their extremes, it suddenly looks like it's a whole lot more intense than it used to be. And I'm not convinced of that.
It's almost I hate to say it, but storm chaser mentality.
Yeah. We all love it. I mean, if we're not having our house beat up by the weather, it's kind of fun to look at and pay attention to. For weirdos like me, we want to know why that happens, and so yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So long-range forecasts are what, 3 to 6 months out or longer?
You tell me. I get hired out to talk about 9 months to a year down the road sometimes. Don't ask me why anybody would do that, but I do get hired out to do that sometimes. And it's very, very tough thing to try to do. So, long range in my book is anything 3 to 6 months, really. But anymore, we do get people wanting us to look a year or two down the road because of long range planning. And now that we're more into this extreme weather environment, there's a lot of need for insurance companies to start hedging their bets down the road. And we actually do a lot of work for insurance companies these days because of that issue.
Do you see like the artificial intelligence, everybody's talking about the new AI weather computer that Europe is using, is that a help or a hindrance?
It's a help for now of sorts. Now, the reason why I say that is it's in its infancy, right? Whether it helps tremendously, and I told you a moment ago that I collect all this data, right? And I'll get all this imagery and I'll start looping it. Well, the AI can do it, a whole lot faster than I can. So in that respect, AI can be a huge benefit for someone like me who wants to be in the trenches and want to look at the data day by day. But AI adds more data and more confusion. Now, that European model that is using AI, it's helpful in some cases, but see what they do with the AI in these models is that they look for, weather patterns of similarity. Well, and I do the same thing, but when you look for patterns of similarity, you have to be careful because you have El Nino and La Nina that alter those patterns. And you can look for a similar pattern, but the resulting rain and snow and temperatures that come from each one of those can be greatly varied by what else is impacting that. So it's not a done science. We're still in an exact science. We're not going to be that much closer necessarily yet, but maybe somewhere down the road. I think that there's a lot of potential with AI, in that respect.
Before we start talking about longer range here, then let's step through this fall. What are things looking like? What do you see the remainder of this fall being?
Yeah, I think for us up here, I would think it's going to be a fairly decent fall. We don't, the atmosphere doesn't have a tremendous amount of cold air in it. We have seen a repeating 45-day cycle up here, actually for North America in general. And if you go back to last October, the latter part of October, and you start counting out 45 days, you'll find that there was a very regular occurrence of cold air that came around. All of our little bouts of late season frosts and even in the middle of summer, those cool days, they were all part of that cycle. So now that cycle, that's an intra-seasonal cycle. It will not go on into the next year. We usually see October as being the month that kind of tears everything up and we start all over again. So what we're looking at right now, I think, is that there's not a lot of cold air in the upper atmosphere right this minute. So we're going to have some shots of cool air like we had last week, but it's not going to be real persistent. We're probably going to have a little bit of a warmer tendency, but it is that time of the year when we're going to cool down, and in these higher latitudes, we can very easily get cool air masses. So I'm looking for kind of a normalish autumn. We're still going to keep a little bit of the dry, but we're about to go into a period of more rain. So for those of you who are in the midst of harvest or planning on doing some work in the next couple of weeks, it is going to start raining, and you'll probably see that as early as maybe the end of the weekend or early next week. It's not going to be big soaking rains that just continue for days on end, but you're going to have a more typical, autumn pattern where you're going to get rain every few days. And so it's not going to be quite as easy and relaxed as it has been. So getting up and, checking the weather every day is going to be even more important, I think. But it is going to get a little wetter, so we have to be a little bit careful with, what that implies. But the temperature bias, I don't think, looks too bad. When we go into late autumn and winter, I think we're going to have that little flavor of La Nina is going to try to bring some colder air around. The upper air wind flow pattern right now looks like it favors the eastern part of North America for a lot of the coldest weather. So probably the northeastern U.S., the Great Lakes region, the eastern Midwest, probably be the areas that have the coolest bias. As far as the farther west you go, the warmer it probably will be. The Pacific Northwest, Western Canada should be pretty warm as we finish out the autumn and go into winter. Now, in that kind of a scenario, you get a northwest flow going across this area, and so you don't get a lot of precipitation. So once we get through fighting the warm and cool air masses as we transition into the cool season, we'll most likely start drying things down again. So that's why I say I don't think we're going to have a really long-lasting wet period, but while we're playing around with the warm and the cool, we're going to get some rain. But we'll finish the autumn with drier tendency.
Might not be a straight-through harvest, but we'll be able to get the harvesting finished.
Yes, I don't see it being hugely problematic.
How about that area, southern Minnesota, South Dakota, that area was so wet?
Yeah, that area, the area's kind of dried down a little bit, but I think what you're getting at is that they wouldn't take a lot of moisture and be back into the soup again. And for that area, I think they're probably going to get a little soupy down that way. I just don't think there's been enough drying to really fix that. But it's going to take a few inches of rain, so it's probably not going to happen right away. But yeah, there'll be a slowdown there. The eastern Midwest probably won't be as wet. This looks like it'll be more western Corn Belt, upper Midwest, western Great Lakes region thing. And the farther east you go, the drier it'll be, at least for the autumn. Now you get into the winter, it'll go the other way around, and they'll get wetter over there. It will be drier over this way.
We kind of dodged a bullet here last week with that first cold shot that we really got.
Yeah.
There was some frost, I heard, up northern Minnesota toward Wisconsin, up in that area more.
Yes.
What do you see for us as far as first frost?
I'm looking at no sooner than the 20th of September. I think that when we get into the last 10 days of the month, I think the odds become much higher that we're going to get some cool air around. For the next 10 days to 2 weeks, we're going to have a lot of storm systems coming into the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, and they're going to go northeastward, and they'll go up across the prairies, and we'll get the rain from it, but the cold will be more out to the west. So I don't think we're going to get real cold until that series of storms ends, and that'll be 10 days to maybe 2 weeks, and then I think we'll get cold. It's not going to be just downright nasty cold, but we'll get that first frost and freeze taking place somewhere in the latter part of September.
Does, Francine now, the hurricane coming up, does that change things at all or not?
Actually, where Francine's coming inland would actually help to encourage cooler weather after it goes up the delta. So a lot of times if you watch hurricanes, when they come inland, there's almost always a trough of low pressure that chases them out. And so cooler weather almost always follows a hurricane when they come up into the heart of the country. So if Francine does what it's supposed to, there should be a push of cool air that comes around as we get into this coming weekend. But the ridge that's made it so warm here those last few days, and will continue to do so into the weekend, will only shift as far as the Midwest is concerned. So when Francine goes by, cooler air will come in. It'll be in Alberta, Saskatchewan, maybe the Pacific Northwest, maybe western North Dakota and Montana, but not this far east. We'll get cooler, but we won't get cold until that sequence of storms goes through and ends. So if Francine had come up through Texas, we would be in a much warmer mode for a longer period of time. So yeah, hurricanes, where they go, has a big play.
Does that heat that California, the West Coast had all summer long, is that gone, or does that come this way too at some point?
I think it's gone. We've seen bits and pieces of it. I mean, it's been 90s in Canada, more times than not. I think it's been warmer in the prairies and it's been warmer in Kansas City, where I'm from. So, but that was one of my big bad no-nos. Here's a story. I went to California, spoke to the dairy folks in California. I can't remember when it was, but it was exactly a week and a half before the heat hit California. I told them that looks good. The heat's going to be farther east. It was bad. It was bad. Stuff like that. It's so hard. When you're doing what I do. I know it probably looks to you guys like meteorologists don't have a care in the world about what they tell folks and how the weather turns out, but that's really not the case with me. I really sweat these things out when I make the forecast, and I know in the back of my mind, I do not know what I'm doing, right? And once in a while, a situation like California will happen, and it just makes me sick. I don't even want to go back to California now for a long time. But, I have no control. Yep. But anyway, to answer your question, that heat is done for the season. We'll have some warm weather, but not like that.
How about those wildfires then?
Oh my gosh. The wildfires in northern Canada and the western part of the U.S., and now even South America is on fire. It's amazing. Yeah, the number of fires. I think at one time I counted in northern Saskatchewan and northern British Columbia, I think there was like 86 fires underway. And up there, their fires are not controlled. They never are. They don't have enough manpower to do that. And all of these were out of control. And, when we look at the satellite pictures and all that smoke comes down all over, actually the smoke was a good thing for a lot of folks who were dry this year because it helped to reduce some of the sunlight. But anyway, yeah, the fires You know, we live in a different time, right?
That's for sure. Well, that's what's fun about looking at some of the satellite views. You actually see the smoke and how the air currents are moving that smoke around.
Yeah, you can tell that brown tinge that gets in there. Yeah, and you know, for the prairies, and maybe to some degree here, but I think less so for the prairies because they were so warm and dry these past couple of years. Having that smoke around was a blessing because they would have dried up even quicker and faster and had more loss if they hadn't had that. So it was a help for them. But
take us around the globe. Weather forecasts, Europe. Maybe Eastern Europe into the Soviet Union or Russia in that area.
Okay, and you want current or past, future? Okay.
Yeah, current, I guess.
Okay, all right. Europe is in the midst of a very wet weather pattern. In Russia, there's this massive high pressure ridge that's been in place off and on all summer long. But right now, it's half the continent practically. And so these storms are coming into Europe. Europe's trying to see seasonal changes, and it's cooling down, and there's more action coming in. The storms keep trying to go eastward, and they run into that ridge, and they keep just slamming one right after the other. So we're getting all this heavy rain. So there's flooding going on in the Czech Republic, Italy, you know, just about everything in the center of Europe. And their harvest is at risk at this point because of all the rain that's coming up. France was really wet for a while. They're getting better. And like I said, if you go into Russia and Ukraine, it's been a dry summer. And very typically in that part of the world, when you have an El Nino event that's supposed to go into La Nina, you'll get these ridges of high pressure. There's two places in the world where this pattern tends to occur. One is right here in the States. If we would have gone from an El Nino to a La Nina as predicted, we would have had a much larger ridge of high pressure in the middle of the country, and it would have been a lot drier and warmer here. And the other places in Russia, and they did get their dry and warm weather. Their winter wheat crop was shrunk down to very small in Russia's southern region and parts of East Ukraine. That area has been fighting dryness ever since. Now they hurt the winter wheat crop, they hurt the spring crop, and now the summer crop, and now they're worried about planting the winter crop again because that area is still very dry. But I think we're about 2 weeks away from the end of that cycle too. Farther to the east in China had a lot of rain this summer. Probably too much rain for a while, but China is so amazing. That country gets a lot of rain, and they can still pull off crops. I don't know how they do it. Maybe they just lie to us, right? Hope nobody's here from China. Anyway, but China was really wet. Now, when I look back at the whole picture, I don't think it was bad enough. I think China's probably got a pretty good crop. Right now, the weather's looking really good, a nice mix. Late season crops are finishing up. Their sugar beets look good. Spring wheat was a little bit tenuous for the harvest there. Their corn and soybeans look like they're probably doing pretty good. And they really just need to dry down. China has a very definite wet and dry season. The dry season starts in the second half of September, goes right on through the winter. So it can rain all at once, but as long as you don't carry it over into October, it usually ends up being okay. India's monsoon did really well this year, probably better than a lot of people expected. There was a lot of flooding in India, but again, like China, they seem to manage it very well. And I think most of the crops in India are going to be good. That's part of the reason why we got this market problem right now, because we haven't really generated any true big problems out there.
You see a little bit of a correction here and there from different government agencies.
Yeah, the supply is just too great.
Australia
got off to a really good start with their wheat, barley, and canola planting. I guess Western Australia was a little bit dry initially, but it's gotten very good. We are just moments away from starting more aggressive plant development in southern parts of the country. Now, Queensland, which is the kind of the northeast part of their wheat belt, they were hot and dry. Their reproductive process took place in the first couple of weeks of September, last days of August. And the situation there was really hot. They were in the 90s every day, Fahrenheit. And no rain. And so it's been really dry. So about 7% of the wheat and barley come out of that region for their whole of the country, but nobody really cares a whole lot. The southern part of Australia is in really good shape. Their wheat, barley, and canola are poised to do really well. And so as long as we can continue a regular occurrence of rainfall, which I think will happen, it should be a pretty good crop. So again, not much help for us.
Okay. I'm saving South America for last, so we can move there now. We've been hearing stories about how dry it is. It's still a dry season, though, yet, right?
That's right. Good for you. Good for you. I give you a bonus point for that. Yeah, one of my frustrations is, the media always tries to make weather exciting, right? And we're always on the verge of a complete failure of everything. And it sells great commercials, but the reality is that people forget science that's involved with the weather. Give you an example. In Brazil, they have a very definite dry season, a very definite wet season, and it quits raining sometimes in April, and it won't rain again until you get into September. Sometimes you can get some rain in between. If you look at the averages in Brazil's key crop areas, I think 0.5 to 1.5 inches of rain is pretty common for a 90-day period ending at the end of August. So their winter, you get 0.5 and 1.5 inches. Well, if you stop and you look and see how much rain they got, they might have got 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch. Oh my gosh, that's half of normal, right? But the temperatures in Brazil are normally in the 80s and 90s all winter long, okay? You guys know better than I do, a 1/2 inch of moisture with temperatures around 90 degrees is gone in a day, right? So it doesn't matter whether it rains 1/2 inch or 1/4 of an inch. When you get done with the winter, there's no moisture in the ground. And these guys they'll sit down and they'll grab these percent of normal charts and they go, oh my gosh, we're 75% below the norm. And it's just bad. It's bad press. It's always dry in Brazil up until this point in time. Now, we've had some wet years where they do get some rain, and that's a big help, okay? But it doesn't really matter. If the rains start in late September like they're supposed to, with scattered showers occurring in Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul and Goiás, then that early soybean crop will start going into the ground. Now, that early shower activity in late September is not always there. Sometimes it's early October. But what you can count on when it comes to Brazil is that their seasonal rains always are kicked in pretty full tilt boogie by the time you get to the end of October. Now, the key for Brazilian production is that they want to get 2 crops in, right? And if they're going to get that early soybean crop planted, they've got to do it in late September and early October. So if we miss those early showers, then it becomes a more of an issue. So as it stands right now, our expectation is that the showers in late September are not going to be good enough to plant with. So there will be some delay. And you add that with this hype that you're talking about how dry it is. And someone sent me a story this morning about worst drought in Brazil history, right? And the reason why they're saying that, there's some truth to that. They're saying that because the Amazon River Basin is in its second year of very severe drought. And so now the whole country is in dryness but the central and southern areas are supposed to be dry. So they're blowing it out of proportion. But that Amazon basin is definitely in bad shape. Anyway, so we expect to have some delay in the start of the soybean planting, their early crop. There will be improved rainfall in October. And by the time you get into November, everything's going to be just good. So I'm looking for the crop in Brazil to be an average crop. Maybe even a little bit better than average. Their precipitation during the during their summer season should be a little bit less than normal. But again, in Brazil, they get too much rain relative to what they need to grow a crop. And if you can cut their rainfall down by 25 to 30%, they'll have huge crops. And we've seen that over and over again. And so I think they're going to have a pretty good crop this year. I'm sorry to give you all this bad information. I mean, I want the prices to go up too, guys. Don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, we're in a bad position right now worldwide, and I just don't see a lot of trouble.
Does that dryness extend down into Argentina? Argentina was dry last year.
Yes. Argentina's had a stretch of really dry years, and a lot of people have been associating with the La Nina. We had 3 years of La Nina, and to a large degree that's true. And it is very dry in Argentina right now. The difference in Argentina is that when they were planting their wheat and barley, there was moisture in the ground. So the crop has a root on it, But it has to start raining now because the temperatures are starting to warm up. We're getting out of the cool season. If they can get a halfway decent rain in the next couple of weeks, then I think that crop will turn around and do really well. But if they miss the next couple of weeks of rain and it's warm, I think they'll lose some yield. I don't think they'll be able to get back out of it.
Argentina, too, is a little more susceptible to maybe a spring frost.
Yes, and in years of La Nina, those are real famous. So if we had a full-blown La Nina, for them to get a frost in November is not unusual in a full-blown La Nina event. We don't have La Nina today. We think maybe we'll have some flavor of it. I do think that there's a potential there will be a little bit of a cool shot still coming up late, but probably not November. It'll probably be early October, my guess is.
Okay. I did forget to mention, if you have a question, just raise your hand up so we can get it recorded. We'll get a microphone over to you and ask a question of Drew if you wish. But otherwise, let's keep talking. We're looking at kind of that South American crops because they're our biggest competitor, it seems like, here in the U.S.
Yes, and really, like I said, Brazil's looking pretty good. Argentina is a little questionable. You know, Argentina, a lot of places go through these cycles. Where they get a little dry for a while and then they get wet for a while, and it's a multi-year thing. We've seen that here, right? And we've seen it in the heart of the Midwest, where we might have, from 2020, to 2023, we had a lot of dryness in North America. It does pass eventually. Argentina is stuck in that mode right now, and I do think that they'll get out of it pretty soon, just like Canada will. But no one really knows exactly when that's going to take place. When I look at the upper air wind flow pattern in the 18-year cycle and all that, I do think that Argentina will start doing better. Argentina is probably not nearly as important as Brazil, though, is as far as influencing our market. So, if Argentina does a little better, it really doesn't matter a whole lot. It really depends on what Brazil does. So.
You mentioned something, I just triggered a thought. Canada, those western wildfires, is that impacting their cropping? Will that impact their cropping for next spring or this fall?
I don't think so. Most of that's in the forest, and the only thing that happens from the fires is just an increase in smoke and haze in the air. So long term, there shouldn't be. Now, some folks would say if you wipe out the forest, right, you're going to cause more heat to occur, and I can't really say anything about that because that's really out of my expertise, but. I don't know how much forest we've really lost, but certainly if we burned out, half of the forest up there, I imagine that there would be a tendency for higher temperatures in the future, but I can't really address that.
Okay. Talk about our winter. What do you see coming for us this winter and the next spring?
Yeah, if we had a full-blown La Nina event, we would get this strong northwest flow and we'd have a tendency to be colder biased. It usually favors the Northwest more than it does here, but we usually get involved with it. Because I think we're going to have some flavor of La Nina a little later in the year, there's still potential we'll see some cool air. But that's not the only game in town, okay? When I look at the 18-year cycle data, I do notice a northwest flow. What I've been noticing is the historical data shows a ridge of high pressure over the western part of North America and a deeper trough over the eastern part of North America. The base of the trough would be in the eastern Midwest, the middle Atlantic coast states. So in a scenario like that, you would bring cold air in, but it would probably be most anomalous in the Great Lakes region and the northeastern United States. The farther west you go, the warmer it would be. So Montana and western parts of the Dakotas probably have fairly warm winter. This area will be a little bit more mixed. You get into the Great Lakes region, be more persistently cool. Precipitation-wise, in that kind of a flow, you don't get a lot of moisture because the air is coming out of Canada. And so once we get into the cold and we're stuck in the cold, we're not going to get a lot of contrast in air mass characteristics, and so you won't get the condensation that you would get. So I'm thinking that our wettest period coming up is probably going to be here in the autumn when we start transitioning into the cool. Once that cool weather pattern is in place, and it'll probably be November, then we'll be kind of looking at a little bit of a drier tendency for the heart of our winter. It won't be absolutely dry. We'll still get weather systems, still get some snow around. It won't be as absent as it was last year. Certainly won't be as warm as it was last year. So a little bit more typical winter, I would say, with maybe a little less snow than maybe what we like.
Just wondering if I needed to get my snowblower fixed.
Well, if you get it fixed, then it won't snow, so you probably should just leave it alone.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works. Questions, anybody? We've got about 5-10 minutes here before we wrap things up with Drew. Anybody have any questions that's burning on your mind you want to find out something about? Yep, go right here.
There's a crop report coming up this week, at the end of this week. In your opinion, do you think that the weather has been good enough to raise the soybean yield and the corn yield in the Corn Belt?
All right, it's a good question. My opinion is that there's been enough dryness in the Ohio River Basin and the Delta and the Tennessee River Basin to maybe drag it down a little bit. But those aren't necessarily key states, but there's still been enough stress, and some of those beans are a little bit smaller than they were, I think. You get out this way, I think it still looks pretty good. So, maybe a half bushel, maybe a bushel, but it doesn't look like, it came too late. The crop was just far enough along that I think it finished out relatively well. So I'd say a half bushel down would be what the official thing would be. Who knows what the USDA is going to say, right? I don't think so, no. The corn crop, I suppose there's still potential they could find more corn, I suppose, but not because of the weather.
Yeah. A lot of times, too, typically what happens is they'll reduce acres, fringe acres. They'll take some of those drowned out spots out and just reduce acres and get the same yield out of that, or the same bushels out of it. Thus, they raise the yields that way, too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Are we going to be able to catch up on our GDUs?
Not for this season. That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. Let me think for a second. I would think probably not.
That's the biggest. As late as this crop got put in, the corn crop for sure.
Yeah.
Are we? Some of it's at Black Lair, some of it's still Dent, and a long ways away yet.
Yeah, it's going to take quite a bit. And I'm afraid we're running out of time. Because once we start with the rain, it'll be really difficult. We may stay warm. I think I think our averages will be above normal. But once we get the rain showing up, it's going to be really difficult to keep that going at the rate that we've been seeing. So I'm going to say no.
Especially, too, with nights cooling down like they are.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really difficult for certainly those areas that are most behind. So I'm going to say no. I don't think we will.
Any further questions for Drew?
Drew, curious, we've been watching the Mississippi River the last few years, and it seems like they've got some areas in the south where they're, again, having some low water levels. What's happening down there? Can you bring us up to speed?
Yeah, the Mississippi last year in October set a record for the lowest level, and we are, let's see, before Francine, we were lower, we have been lower on that river these last several days, since the 1st of September, than we were a year ago. I had put out a report a couple of weeks ago saying that I didn't think that we were going to get enough moisture this fall to get the Missouri and the Ohio rivers cranked up enough to get those barge restrictions off. Francine, perfect example of California all over again, right? Francine could change that, but Francine's rains are going to be mostly Louisiana and southern Mississippi. It's not going to help the waters that are coming into the Delta. And so that river level may come up for a little while they get 1 to 3 inches of rain, but without the Ohio and the Missouri and Mississippi upper parts really having a good amount of moisture running off, I don't think it's sustainable. So we will continue to go down. Now, most of the longer range stuff I've been looking at for the Mid-South, the lower Midwest, lower Missouri River areas, I have seen a lot of below normal precipitation coming up for these next several weeks. So with that in mind, that's why I put out the report. Excuse me. And I don't think we're going to get enough moisture to get the barge traffic up to where it ought to be. So those river levels will stay low. Francine will help, but Francine will probably only help for about 5 to 7 days, and we'll be right back at it.
Is that mainly, but the whole lowness has been because of the Ohio River Valley, mostly, right?
Mostly, yes. Yes. The Missouri's actually been fairly well this year. It was low early on, but it's really come along pretty well. So yeah, it's mostly an Ohio River, and they will do better in the winter, but the harvest is going to be over by the time we start doing really well in the Ohio River Valley. So I think we'll come into spring in better shape on the lower Mississippi, but I think during this harvest season, it's going to be a little iffy.
Give us a synopsis here while we wrap things up, looking at this forecast for this region, and what are we looking at?
Yeah, I think for the most part, most of us can expect an average autumn. I don't think there's going to be any real wild extremes. So, but compared to, the perfect dry you guys all would like to have while you're harvesting, that's probably not going to be the case. But when we do get rained out, it's not going to be for weeks at a time. It just doesn't look like that kind of environment. We will turn cooler. That'll slow down the drying rates, but you guys are all used to that. I mean, that's normal anyway. So probably the best thing I can suggest is to, make sure you get up and listen to Red River Farm Network every morning, right? And find out what the forecast is. And hopefully I'm telling folks enough every day that they can make some plans. The one thing that's missing on there is the longer range stuff. And it's kind of tough to be able to try to squeeze 3 minutes of weather that you guys can go for a long time with. So anyway, whatever, I'm rambling, sorry.
All right. Any further questions for Drew? Got to make room here we've got another seminar coming up here in just a little bit, but
So some people talk about the war in Ukraine and all the dust and from the fighting and stuff. How big of an event does it take to make an effect on the weather?
That's a good question. We look at a lot of volcanoes, and in order for a volcano to change world weather, you've got to get that particulate matter up to 60,000 feet or higher, and it's got to be consistent for an extended period of time. So most of the dust that you're getting from those, I say minor, it's not minor, but from those explosions that would occur would probably not have much of an impact. But just like Randy was suggesting before, if you wipe out part of the forest, if you wipe out a lot of, areas that have been, helping to hold the temperatures back or whatever the case may be, you could have some, short-term effect. But no, you really need something longer range. In 2022, we had that Hunga volcano. And there's still a lot of argument in the meteorology world as to what the impact of that has really been. But that volcano shot, it shot water vapor well up into the stratosphere, and that supposedly is one of the primary reasons for all the extra heat we've had since 2022. And that is supposed to take a period of 5 years to get out of the atmosphere, but recently, a few research groups have been suggesting that maybe that's not going to come out as quickly as they thought originally. And the reason for that is where would it go? I mean, the stratosphere is a very dry place. Once you put the moisture in there, I don't know where it would go. It doesn't rain out, so I don't know. But there's some debate as to what the implications of that is. And I firmly believe that volcano had a huge influence on the world temperatures in 2023 and this last year. So there's nothing else that changed as dramatically as that. So
is there enough of current volcanoes causing issues at all or not?
Most of the volcanoes that have erupted here recently have not managed to get particulate matter up that high. The difference between the Hunga volcano and these run-of-the-mill volcanoes is the Hunga was underwater. And so when it erupted, it took all the water from the ocean and it vaporized it and then sent it way up in the atmosphere. You take a volcano that's a normal volcano that's above ground, and when it erupts, it spews all that particulate matter into the air. Well, particulate matter will reflect sunlight and will cause the earth to cool. But water vapor traps traps the heat and keeps it hotter. It increases the greenhouse effect. And so it's totally different volcano types. And this volcano that erupted in 2022 was, the biggest modern volcano that has ever occurred that we know of, even more so than Krakatoa. And Krakatoa was an above water event. So this was unprecedented, and we're still learning from it.
Right. Any further questions for Drew? If not, let's give Drew a hand. Thank you much for joining us here at the Issues and Events Center.
Thank you.
Higher yields require high-performance crop nutrition. Through fusion technology, MicroEssentials is designed to increase nutrient uptake throughout the growing cycle. The unique chemical composition of MicroEssentials creates an acid zone around each granule. Lowering the pH promotes the formation of dihydrogen orthophosphate, a more readily available form of phosphate, resulting in increased nutrient uptake. With MicroEssentials SZ, plants more efficiently take up zinc because each nutritionally balanced granule delivers zinc evenly across the field. MicroEssentials also contains small elemental sulfur particles designed for faster oxidation to sulfate and increased uptake. The proof is in the performance. Research shows that plants take up nutrients more efficiently with MicroEssentials compared to traditional fertilizer blends, resulting in higher yields and higher profitability.